Step out, you're not real family, Basao, he hissed beside the camera flash. The laughter around us froze for half a second before the photographer forced a smile. I stepped aside, pretending it didn't sting, pretending I hadn't just been erased from my own grandson's wedding photo. My name is Helen, 58, mother of 2, grandmother of 4. The day had started like a memory worth keeping. The garden shimmered under the late afternoon sun. Children ran between the tables, chasing bubbles that glowed in the light. My granddaughter twirled in her pale dress, giggling as she spilled a drop of lemonade on her shoes. I'd spent weeks helping plan this. The flowers, the catering, the payments the couple couldn't quite cover. The smell of roses mixed with champagne bubbles, carrying a kind of peace I thought we'd earned as a family. For a while I believed it. For a while it almost felt like love had settled in for good. But warmth has a short memory when pride enters the room. He stood too close, his hand gripping my elbow as he whispered that line, the one that sliced through 40 years of family gatherings. My daughter's eyes flicked toward me, then away, like I was a stranger who'd crashed their perfect picture. The camera flashed. I blinked, knowing my face wouldn't be there when the prince came out. I stayed quiet. Silence can hide shame, but it can also build resolve. Later during dinner, he raised a glass and bragged about paying for everything himself. I smiled across the table, the kind of polite smile that hides fury. My granddaughter leaned over and whispered, "Grandma, don't cry." I wasn't crying. Not yet. After the guests left and the music faded, I packed up leftover cake and folded napkins, more out of habit than care. The house smelled of wine and wilting flowers. Around 10 p.m., my phone rang, his number glowing on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but habit still held me. He started with fake sweetness. "You wouldn't believe how much the hotel costs, Helen. Could you loan us $2,000? Just until Monday." My voice stayed calm. "Didn't I warn you about debts built on pride?" He laughed, but it came out thin. "You'll help. You always do." "Not this time." For a few seconds, there was nothing, just his breath, sharp and annoyed. "You're making a mistake," he said, and the call ended. I stared at the dark screen, hearing the echo of the day, laughter, clinking glasses, that one cruel sentence beside the camera flash. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was what it bought. A hierarchy of belonging where I sat at the bottom, despite paying most of the bills. When I looked at the printed photos a week later, I found the truth inked in color. They'd cropped me out. Just clean edits. No trace left of the woman who made the day possible. I slid one photo into a drawer and closed it gently. Proof of how love gets rewritten when money confuses gratitude with control. That night, I wrote a single line in my old notebook. "Never again will I buy my place at their table." The pen felt heavy, but my hand didn't shake. I wasn't angry, not yet, just clear. A small vow formed inside me, quiet but certain. I would remember every slight, every cost, every word he used to shrink me, and when the time came, I would return their own pride to them, in exact change. He thought I'd still pay. "We must have misplaced your gift," he said with a grin. His voice carried that polished tone of someone who'd rehearsed it. I watched him glance at my daughter, and she nodded too quickly. The wedding had ended just a day earlier, yet the warmth already felt fake. I wanted to believe them, I really did. But my stomach tightened, and that old sense of being quietly dismissed crept back like it always did when money was involved. The morning light came through my kitchen window, catching on the envelope I'd kept from the bank. I'd written the amount clearly. A check meant for their future. I'd wanted them to have a better start than I ever did. The air smelled faintly of coffee and dish soap. Normal things, but I'd learned long ago that betrayal doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It hides in polite smiles and missing envelopes. By mid-morning, I drove to the bank. "Could you check if my wedding gift check was deposited?" I asked the young clerk. She looked puzzled, typed for a while, and said softly, "It was deposited yesterday, but into a different account. Same last name, though." My fingers went cold against the counter. "Can you print that?" She nodded, handing me a thin slip that suddenly weighed more than the bouquet I'd carried at the wedding. When I called my daughter, she sounded tired. "Mom, it's probably just a mix-up," she said. "He handles our accounts. Don't worry about it." I said nothing for a moment. Then, carefully, "I trust you, but I'll be closing my account today." The silence stretched before she hung up. I sat there with the phone in my lap, watching the red light on the answering machine blink. It was close to 2 p.m. when I signed the withdrawal form. The teller counted my remaining balance, less than I expected, but still mine. I folded the bills into my purse and walked out with my back straighter than it had been in months. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, calm, like someone who finally understood the rules of a game they never agreed to play. At home, I made myself dinner, 1 plate, 1 fork. The ticking clock on the wall hit 8 exactly when I sat down. The fork scraped against the plate, a sound so sharp it reminded me of the camera flash the day before. I thought of his smirk, his hand pushing me aside, his voice dripping with false charm. He wanted control, always had, and I realized it wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about keeping me uncertain, grateful for scraps, ashamed of boundaries. But I'd just broken that pattern. The phone rang again around 9. I let it go to voicemail. His voice came through, low and annoyed. "We didn't mean to upset you. Don't make this into something ugly." I turned the volume down and whispered, "You already did." Then I took the bank slip from my purse and slid it into the same drawer as the cropped wedding photo. 2 proofs side by side, one emotional, one financial. As I closed the drawer, I noticed my reflection in the glass frame above it. For once, I didn't look like someone hoping to be included. I looked like someone drawing a line they couldn't cross without consequences. The house was quiet. Outside, streetlights flickered on. I made a note in my small ledger, the one where I'd tracked household bills for years. Gift averted, account closed, balance safe. My handwriting shook a little, but not from fear, from clarity. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd call crying, that I'd apologize for accusing him. But I'd seen enough. He realized I'd frozen the account. "He says you're trying to ruin us." That was how she began. No greeting, no hesitation, just accusation. I stood by the window, the phone pressed against my ear, watching the porch light flicker as dusk settled in. I could hear him in the background, whispering things I couldn't make out but could feel. His voice had that same oily certainty, the tone of a man rewriting the story before the truth ever has a chance to breathe. "I'm not ruining anything," I said softly. "I'm protecting what's mine." She scoffed. "He told me you froze the account. He said you're trying to embarrass him." "I froze my money," I replied. "He just didn't expect boundaries." Her sigh came sharp and tired. "Mom, can't you just let it go? You're making it worse." There it was, the invisible line every mother dreads. When your child's loyalty no longer runs to you, but to someone who controls her peace. I didn't argue. I walked to the kitchen table where I'd laid out my notes, copies of receipts, dates, even that bank slip I'd tucked beside the photo. The air was still. Too still. "Let me play you something," I said. I pressed the speakerphone button and scrolled through saved messages. His voice filled the room. "She'll never know. I've already moved the funds. Old women don't read statements anyway." Then laughter. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Her voice cracked for a second. "He said it was taken out of context." "Context?" I repeated. "That's his voice, and those are my funds. There's no context that changes theft." Silence followed. It stretched for too long. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't have recorded that." "He recorded himself," I said. "All I did was keep proof." The line went dead. I stood there for a while, listening to the dial tone, a flat, endless sound that used to mean something had disconnected. Now, it just meant another truth refused to be heard. I drew the curtain slightly aside and looked at the street. The same light on the porch blinked again, that dull yellow glow I used to leave on when she'd stay out too late in college. I'd promised myself I'd never let that light go out, no matter how far she drifted. Tonight, it felt like the light was warning me. Don't confuse silence for peace. I pulled my notepad closer and began writing. Every date, every call, every sum that had changed hands. It wasn't spite, it was survival. When someone twists reality long enough, you need paper to remember what's true. By 9 p.m., I'd filled 4 pages. My hand cramped, but I didn't stop. I even wrote down the smallest things. The look on his face at the wedding, the way she avoided my eyes at dinner, the call to the bank clerk. If he ever tried to turn it all upside down, I'd have the sequence straight. I didn't plan on fighting him in court. Not yet. I just needed to make sure the truth didn't disappear in polite conversation. When I finished, I placed the notebook beside the phone. The curtain moved slightly as the night breeze slipped in. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. It sounded like punctuation, the end of something fragile. I whispered into the quiet, "You can lie to her, but not forever." I knew what he wanted. He wanted to make me doubt myself, to erase the evidence by making me seem emotional or confused. But I wasn't confused. I was methodical now, colder than before. I picked up the phone one last time and replayed that voicemail. Each word steadied me more than the last. Proof doesn't shout, it waits. He didn't know I was documenting. "You'll thank me later," he said, sliding the form across the table. The paper made a soft sound as it touched the wood, like a trap closing. He smiled in that careful, polite way people do when they think they've already won. I noticed the flowers first, lilies, the kind that smell sweet but die quickly. He set them on the counter, as if their fragrance could distract me. "It's just a small insurance adjustment," he said. "A formality. Protects everyone if something happens." His tone was warm, rehearsed, too confident. I took the pen he offered but didn't uncap it. "And this makes you the... what? Beneficiary?" He chuckled. "It's just standard, Mom. You trust me, don't you?" That word again. Trust. He used it like a key that only opened doors in his direction. I smiled. "Of course. Leave it here. I'll read it tonight." He didn't like that. His jaw tightened, and the charm cracked just enough for me to glimpse the greed underneath. "You always overthink paperwork. It's simple stuff." "Maybe," I said, "but my eyes aren't what they used to be. I'll take my time." He left with another forced smile. The door clicked behind him, and for a long moment I stared at the vase of lilies. Their scent was already too strong, too heavy, like something that tries too hard to mask decay. That evening, around 7 p.m., I drove to a retired notary I knew, Mr. Harris. He'd handled documents for my husband before he passed. His small office still smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. I handed him the form. "Can you tell me if anything seems... off?" He adjusted his glasses, scanned the page, then frowned. "The witness signature. I've seen this handwriting. Same man tried this trick years ago. He's bold." He looked up. "You trust this person?" I exhaled slowly. "I used to." He leaned back in his chair. "Keep the copy. Do not sign. And change your will if your name crosses his path again." The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights passed like judgment, bright, then gone, bright, then gone. When I reached the house, the flowers had already started to wilt. I tossed them into the trash, then placed the unsigned form in my filing cabinet. Top drawer, front slot, under my bank statements. Proof doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits quietly until it's needed. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office with coffee that had gone cold by the time she entered. "I want to make changes," I said. "Remove 2 names from my will. Replace them with a scholarship fund, something that helps someone who's never had a fair start." She nodded. "Understood." The papers printed with a low hum that filled the silence. Signing them felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from him. "Did you sign? We can send it in today." I replied, "Not yet. I'll handle it." There was no response after that. But later, I saw the read receipt. He'd seen it, and I could almost imagine the panic rising behind his eyes. He'd overplayed his hand. I poured myself tea, sat by the window, and thought about how easily affection can disguise control. Family makes you lower your guard, but sometimes that's the very place betrayal hides best. I looked at the stack of papers beside me. The unsigned form, my new will, the receipt from the lawyer's office. My life, neatly organized, free from the hands that tried to hold it hostage. He thought I'd sign without looking, that my trust was blind, that my age made me careless. But he was wrong. I'd spent my life reading between lines, contracts, promises, and smiles that never reached the eyes. As the afternoon light shifted across the table, I wrote one note at the bottom of the insurance form before filing it away. Attempted fraud, May 14th. Simple, factual, enough to jog my memory later. People like him never expect you to stay quiet and prepared. They mistake calm for weakness. He realized too late I'd kept the copy. "You humiliated me in front of my wife," he spat across the table. His voice was low, sharp enough to slice through the quiet murmur of the restaurant. The candle between us flickered, its flame bending toward him as if drawn by the heat of his anger. I kept my eyes on the menu, pretending to study the wine list, pretending I didn't see the red creeping up his neck. He'd invited me to dinner to clear the air. I agreed because sometimes peace has to be earned through one last uncomfortable meal. The air smelled of garlic and expensive steak, and the sound of soft jazz barely covered the tension. I could feel eyes from nearby tables drifting our way. "I didn't humiliate you," I said. "You did that to yourself." He leaned closer. "You're ruining my marriage." "No," I said quietly. "You're ruining your own reputation." The waiter approached with forced cheer. "Would we like dessert?" "No," he snapped. "Just the check." When the waiter left, he dropped his voice again. "You're making everyone think I'm some kind of thief." I looked up at him. "If you don't want people to think it, stop acting like one." He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Then he laughed, a humorless, dangerous sound. "You're getting bold." "I'm getting tired." The waiter returned with the bill. He reached for his wallet, slid his card across with the flourish of someone who expected applause. The waiter was gone less than a minute before returning, quiet and apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. The card was declined." His hand jerked back like he'd been burned. "That's impossible." The waiter placed the small folder on the table. "It says cash only now. I can bring a machine if—" "No," I interrupted. "It's fine." I reached into my purse and handed over a few folded bills. "Let's not make a scene." He glared. "You think this makes you look noble?" "It makes me look finished," I said. The waiter left again. We sat in silence, the air thick enough to choke on. His eyes darted to the other tables, to the people who were pretending not to notice. Image was everything to him. Control, power, charm. I'd just pulled one thread, and his composure was unraveling in front of strangers. He leaned in until his voice barely carried past the flame. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll remember it first." He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. The sound made people look. He hated that. The audience, the lack of control. He threw a crumpled napkin onto the plate. "You've turned my wife against me, poisoned her with your lies. She's—" "Your wife," I said. "If she believes me, maybe she's seen enough truth for once." For a second, I thought he might actually shout. Instead, he stood there trembling, breathing through his teeth. Then he straightened his jacket and walked out, leaving the candle still burning and his pride in ashes beside it. I waited a few minutes before leaving. The sympathetic waiter brought me the receipt and whispered, "He's left before, hasn't he?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, but this time I made sure to keep the bill." The smell of extinguished wax lingered as I stepped outside. It was just past 9, and the streetlights glowed against the wet pavement. I folded the receipt and slipped it into my purse with the others. The photo, the bank slip, the unsigned form. My collection of quiet truths. People talk about confrontation like it's explosive, but this was quieter, colder. A shift you can feel in your bones when the power changes hands. He thought he'd cornered me, but I'd learned something he hadn't. Dignity doesn't shout. It documents. When I got home, I placed the receipt in my folder. The ink was already smudging from where his thumb had pressed too hard. Proof, again, that arrogance always leaves fingerprints. As I turned off the lamp, I heard his words echoing in my head, not as a threat, but as confirmation. The war he started wasn't about family anymore. It was about control, and I had just shown him how easily control can be taken away. He swore I'd regret crossing him. I shouldn't tell you this, but he's in trouble. That's what the voice on the phone said. Quiet, careful, like someone checking over his shoulder before speaking. I recognized the tone, guilt wrapped in caution. He introduced himself as Mark, from the same office my son-in-law bragged about running. You didn't hear it from me, he added, but the audit found missing money. He used your name on a few transfers. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, each second landing harder than the last. My name? I asked. Yes, he whispered. On 3 different deposits. It looks like he funneled funds through your old savings. It's messy. I thought you should know before the story spins. I thanked him, calm on the surface, though my hands trembled slightly as I hung up. The coffee on the table had gone cold. Its surface reflected the dull gray morning, a morning that suddenly felt like a turning point. I opened my laptop. The screen's glow hit my face as I read the email Mark sent moments later. An attached screenshot of a complaint from the HR department. The subject line read, "Unauthorized access, external account link, Helen D." Below, his name, my name, his pattern. I didn't panic. I printed the email, watched the paper slide out of the printer warm and smooth. Proof had a strange comfort to it, like order returning to chaos. I placed it in the growing folder on my desk, the one labeled with nothing but a single word: records. By 11 a.m., I called the company's internal audit office. I'd like to speak to whoever's handling the recent embezzlement review, I said. The woman on the line sounded cautious but kind. We don't usually involve family members, she said. I'm not just family, I replied. I'm listed as part of the transactions. That got her attention. She transferred me. The next voice was sharper, professional. This is Karen. I'm the lead auditor. I explained everything, from the missing wedding gift, to the insurance form, to the dinner confrontation. I could almost hear her typing. When I mentioned my notes, every date, every amount, she paused. You kept records? Yes, since March. There was a small exhale on the line. Then you've done half my job already. We met that afternoon in her office. She had files stacked high, coffee mugs lined like soldiers, and a small plant wilting under fluorescent light. She slid a folder toward me. Here, she said. Inside were copies of bank statements, transfer forms, and one page marked with yellow highlights, my name beside his signature. Can you confirm this isn't your authorization? She asked. I can confirm it's his handwriting, I said. She studied me for a moment. He'll claim ignorance. Men like that always do. But this lines up perfectly with what we've seen. Money moved in small increments, timed around payroll. He used your goodwill as cover. Hearing it said aloud hit harder than I expected. I sat back, folded my hands together. So he dragged me into fraud to make it look legitimate. Yes, she said, and if we hadn't caught it, you'd be the one under investigation. I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. He hadn't just wanted control, he wanted insurance against his own downfall. My name was his shield. But now it was turning into the blade. Before leaving, I asked, "What happens next?" She looked firm. An official report. But I'd suggest keeping your documentation close. People like him fight dirty when cornered. Back home, I poured fresh coffee and stared at the folder. Every piece of proof had weight. The photo, the bank slip, the insurance form, and now the email printout. Each one told a version of the same story. His confidence built on my silence. The laptop screen dimmed to black. In the reflection, I caught my own expression. steady, unafraid. The silence that used to protect him was now mine to command. Around 8 p.m., Mark called again. "The internal memo just went out," he whispered. "Your name's on the top of the investigation list, but everyone here knows it's him. He's been pacing his office all day." I smiled faintly. "Good. Let him pace." It wasn't vindictive. It was justice finding its shape. For months I'd been reacting. Now I was the one setting the rhythm. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the room. I took another sip of coffee, cold again, but satisfying this time. I wasn't hiding from the noise anymore. The investigation had my name at the top. "You'll need to cooperate, Mrs. Lane." The older man's tone carried the kind of politeness that hides a threat. 2 lawyers stood in my doorway, briefcases in hand, the smell of rain still clinging to their coats. I motioned them inside. The younger one, nervous, careful, set a folder on my dining table. The papers fanned out like a silent accusation. I scanned the first page. My name appeared beside his, side by side under the words, "Financial Accomplice." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. "You're saying I'm part of his fraud?" I asked. The older attorney didn't flinch. "You've been subpoenaed. It's standard procedure." "Standard," I repeated, almost laughing. "There's nothing standard about being betrayed twice." He began listing dates, transactions, amounts. I already knew them all. "I can provide documentation," I said, reaching for the drawer near the phone. "Every withdrawal, every transfer, I have it written down." The younger lawyer watched me closely as I placed the folder on the table. His gaze softened. "These are detailed," he said quietly. "I learned to keep records," I replied. "People forget the truth if you don't write it down." The clock on the wall ticked toward noon. Outside, tires splashed through puddles left by the morning rain. The senior attorney flipped through the pages, lips tightening as he read my annotations, each one dated, cross-referenced, impossible to dispute. He asked, "Did you authorize these transfers?" "No." "Did you benefit from them?" "No." He looked at me over his glasses. "Then why would he use your name?" "Because mine still carries trust," I said. "His doesn't." That landed heavier than I intended. The younger lawyer hesitated, then spoke. "If these notes match the audit records, you're not a suspect. You're a witness." "I'm not anyone's victim," I corrected him. "Not anymore." The older one sighed, collecting his papers. "We'll verify, but for now, you are required to appear in court." He placed a crisp document in front of me, its texture thick and cold under my fingers. The ink wasn't even dry. "Sign here to confirm receipt." I read the header. "Subpoena for testimony." My hand didn't shake. "He thinks if I stand beside him in court, the blame will blur," I said. "But paper has a longer memory than lies." The young attorney nodded slowly. "Keep everything. Originals, copies, notes, especially your timeline. You might need it." "All." "I already assumed I would," I said. When they left, the house fell into a heavy stillness. I stared at the ring on my finger, twisting it once before setting it on the table beside the subpoena. Symbols of trust, both of them, one personal, one institutional, and both misused by the same man. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down again, flipping through the documents until the words blurred into one continuous ache. The subpoena wasn't a threat anymore. It was proof that he'd crossed a line too public to hide behind charm. At 3 p.m., the phone rang. It was the younger lawyer. "I just spoke with the auditor," he said. "Your files match every detail. You're in the clear. But this case, it's bigger than him. The firm's involved." I took a breath. "Then I'll testify." There was silence. Then he said softly, "You understand what that means?" "Yes, it means he finally loses the stage." I hung up and leaned back, the afternoon light dimming across the kitchen counter. For months, his manipulation had lived in the shadows of family dinners and private accounts. Now it was in the open, documented, dated, sealed. I gathered my folder, tied it with a string, and placed it next to the subpoena. Everything I needed fit inside that thin packet of paper. His power, once so loud, was suddenly fragile, trapped between printed lines that couldn't bend for ego or lies. That evening, I wrote the date at the top of my journal. Friday, 6:45 p.m. A reminder that by Monday morning, the story would no longer belong to him. The court date was set for Monday. "Mom, he forged everything." Her voice cracked before the sentence ended. It was close to midnight, the hour when truth finds no place left to hide. I'd been sitting by the window, watching the quiet street, when she appeared in the doorway, hair messy, eyes swollen, trembling like a child again. I didn't speak. She stepped closer, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hand. "He made me sign things," she whispered. "Insurance papers, checks, even the will. He said it was just to protect us." I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. "And you believed him?" She nodded once, tears starting to fall. "At first. Then I saw him copy your signature. I told him it was wrong, but he said if I talked, he'd cut me off, said I'd lose everything you worked for." She laid the paper on the table. The ink was faintly smudged, the edges damp from her hands. A signed confession, her own, but written under his control. My name appeared twice, his 3 times. The final line read, "All accounts and assets to remain under joint authority until further review." I reached across the table, touched her wrist. "You're not the enemy," I said softly. "Fear makes us all accomplices, until we choose otherwise." The lamplight flickered against the old photo frame. Beside us, one taken on her graduation day. I remembered how proud she looked, holding that diploma while he stood behind her, hand heavy on her shoulder, the smile too forced. I'd missed the warning signs even then. She wiped her face. "He said you were unstable, that the court would side with him. I didn't know what to believe anymore." I exhaled slowly. "You believed what he fed you, because he made you dependent on his version of safety, but that ends tonight." She looked up, her expression shifting from shame to something steadier. "What do we do now?" "We document everything," I said. "You'll give this note to the attorney. I'll add it to the file. No one can rewrite the truth once it's written twice." For a while we sat in silence. The house felt different, less haunted, as if air finally moved again. I made her tea, the kind she used to drink after school. The steam rose between us, soft and steady, carrying years of lost peace. "I was so scared he'd find out," she whispered. "Every time the mail came, I hid the letters. He checked my phone, my messages, everything." I nodded. He needed control to feel powerful. It's what people like him live on. She clutched her bracelet, the one he'd given her for her birthday. "Should I keep this?" "No," I said. "It's not jewelry anymore. It's a reminder." She slipped it off, placed it beside the photo frame. Both objects caught the dim glow from the hallway, symbols of what had been and what would never be again. At 12:30 a.m., she leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "I thought you'd hate me." "I did," I admitted, "but only for the silence, not for the fear. You broke it tonight." Her tears soaked through my sleeve, but I didn't move. For the first time in months, we were on the same side of the line he'd drawn between us. The same truth that once divided us now bound us together. I remembered the subpoena waiting on the counter, the folder labeled records, the chain of evidence forming piece by piece. His empire of control was cracking, not from revenge, but from confession. She looked up. "He's going to know, isn't he?" "Yes," I said, "and he'll understand what it means when someone he trained to lie finally tells the truth." She nodded, her breathing slowing as exhaustion took over. "Then let him know," she said quietly. By the time the clock hit 1, she was asleep on the couch, her hand still resting near the letter. I covered her with a blanket, stared at the paper one last time, and slipped it into the folder with the others. The air in the house was still, but not heavy anymore. It felt like recovery, a fragile kind, but real. I turned off the lamp, whispered to the dark. You taught her to lie. I taught her to survive. He realized she'd switched sides. This court recognizes the evidence provided by Mrs. Lane. The judge's voice echoed across the room, measured and calm, but I could hear the ripple it caused. He sat 2 rows ahead of me, shoulders stiff, his attorney whispering something that looked like prayer but sounded like panic. I kept my eyes forward. The folder on my lap felt heavier than it should have. Inside were the receipts, statements, and the handwritten notes I'd kept for months, the quiet record of every lie he'd turned into a weapon. When they called my name, I stood, steady. My knees didn't shake. The microphone caught the sound of papers sliding open, soft but final. You may proceed, the judge said. His lawyer started first. Your Honor, my client is a devoted husband, a family man. The financial irregularities are the result of miscommunication, not malice. I looked straight at him. He forged my name on insurance forms, I said. The lawyer blinked. We dispute that claim. I have the originals, I said, placing the folder on the table, and the statements showing he moved funds between our accounts without consent. The clerk gathered them, handed them to the bench. The courtroom was silent, except for the turning of pages, the sound of truth-finding air. He shifted in his chair, tugged at his collar. This is a misunderstanding, he said too loudly. She doesn't understand how these things work. The judge raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you'd like to explain how your wife's signature appears on documents notarized in her absence. He hesitated. That pause said everything. My attorney, a young woman with a calm precision, stepped forward. Your Honor, each document bears consistent handwriting, identical spacing, and matching dates. We verified with the bank. The transactions benefited only the defendant. She opened the folder wider. The receipts were marked with small tabs, every one a timestamp of deceit. These show withdrawals totaling $48,000 over a span of 8 months, diverted to his personal account. I didn't flinch when he turned to glare at me. You're destroying your family, he hissed under his breath. No, I said quietly. You already did that. I'm just making it official. The judge tapped the gavel once. Order. The court officer passed the evidence packet up for review. I watched the judge's expression shift, subtle but real. Each page built the same story. The checks, the fake signatures, the insurance claim listing me as a co-signer for his debts. When they asked if I wished to make a statement, I nodded. He used family as collateral, I said. He made trust a tool for profit. Every apology he gave was a transaction, every promise an investment in silence. The judge's pen paused midair. Continue, he said softly. He said money was control, I added. He was right. But control doesn't last forever when people stop being afraid of the cost. I looked at the gallery. Faces blurred, but one stood out. My daughter, sitting near the back, head high, her hands clasped tight around the bracelet she'd once thrown away. She was there not as a victim, but as a witness. For a moment, the room felt smaller. The air was heavy, but honest. The same silence he once used to dominate was now the silence that condemned him. The opposing attorney shifted tactics, grasping for sympathy. My client acted out of pressure, not greed. The financial strain— Stop, I interrupted. He didn't act out of pressure. He acted because he thought no one would challenge him. The judge nodded slowly. The documents speak clearly. You've done your part, Mrs. Lane. I sat down, my folder closed now, lighter somehow. The hearing continued. Procedural talk, scheduling, motions, but I barely heard any of it. My pulse had steadied. I'd survived the worst kind of trial long before walking into that courtroom. When the gavel struck again, it wasn't an ending. It was a pause, the moment before justice takes form. As people rose to leave, he turned once more, face pale, voice low. You think you've won? I met his eyes. No, the truth did. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the courthouse steps, bright and unflinching. I breathed it in, the first real air in months. My daughter joined me, her hand brushing mine, not seeking comfort, just sharing strength. She whispered, "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we wait for the verdict." The clerk's voice carried from the doorway behind us, firm and final. "Verdict scheduled for next week. The defendant is found guilty of fraud." The words struck the air like the final crack of a whip. I didn't breathe. No one did. The courtroom froze in that instant between sound and silence, when everything you've lived through condenses into a single verdict. He stood, his face pale, his jaw tight. For once, there was no smirk, no charm, no manipulation left to deploy. Just the hollow echo of a man who'd spent his life building control from other people's fear. And finally, ran out of believers. My daughter's hand found mine. It trembled at first, then steadied. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't feel victory. I felt weight leaving, the kind that crushes from inside. The judge continued reading the decision, his voice calm, precise. "All contested assets shall be seized and returned where rightful. Sentence deferred pending restitution hearing." The gavel dropped once, sharp, absolute. Across the room, the bailiff guided him back toward his seat. I watched his wrists twitch as they reached for the cuffs, his shoulders collapsing slightly, as if gravity had just remembered him. I had imagined this moment so many times, but reality was quieter than I expected. No applause, no outburst, just the ticking of the clock above the bench, steady, relentless, the same rhythm that had marked every sleepless night waiting for this. It read 3:15 p.m. I knew I would remember that hour forever. The hour silence ended. He turned once before they took him out. His eyes searched my face for weakness, for regret, for anything he could still twist. I gave him nothing. The prosecutor approached, shaking my hand briefly. "You did everything right," he said. "Your records were airtight. Without them, this might have gone differently." "I know," I replied. "That's why I kept them." My daughter exhaled beside me. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think he ever loved us?" I looked at her. "Love doesn't use signatures as weapons." She nodded, eyes wet but clear. The court clerk handed me a copy of the judgment order, one sheet of paper, plain and official. It felt heavier than it should have. The print blurred slightly as I read it. Restitution required in full. Custodial review pending. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my folder, the same one that had once held every proof of his deceit. Now it carried closure. As people began to leave, the whispers started, the kind that always follow public disgrace. Reporters murmured about the fall of a respected businessman, about the quiet wife who'd outlasted him. None of them understood it wasn't about revenge. It was about oxygen. We walked down the courthouse steps slowly. The afternoon sun was too bright, the air too sharp. I'd spent so long under shadow that light felt foreign. "Where will we go now?" my daughter asked. "Home," I said. "But not the old kind of home. The one we'll build ourselves." She smiled faintly. "We don't even have the house yet." I smiled back. "Then we'll start with peace. That's free." Behind us, a police van door slammed. The sound echoed down the marble walls like punctuation. The end of one story, the beginning of another. For the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. Justice hadn't restored what was lost. No paper could, but it restored balance, and balance was enough. I looked once more at the courthouse clock before turning away. Its hands kept moving, indifferent to human drama. He was gone now, escorted into the system he'd once used to intimidate others. And yet, as we reached the parking lot, a small chill ran through me. The kind that comes not from fear but from instinct, that sense that unfinished business lingers in silence. I pressed the folder tighter to my chest. He wasn't finished with me yet. "We'd like your comment, Mrs. Lane. The story's gone viral." That was the first thing I heard when I opened the front gate. A crowd of reporters stood on the sidewalk, cameras flashing like restless eyes. The gate's metal groaned under the weight of curiosity. I wasn't surprised. Guilt travels fast, but truth, once it catches fire, burns longer. Microphones pushed forward. "Is it true you exposed your husband's fraud yourself?" "Yes," I said simply. "And I'd do it again." The noise around me thickened. They wanted emotion, scandal, breakdown. But I had none left to give. The morning air smelled of damp paper and coffee from the crew's van. Ordinary scents, absurdly calm for what they called a public reckoning. I hadn't planned to speak to anyone, but the calls kept coming. TV, radio, blogs. One headline read, "Wife turns whistleblower in family fraud case." Another said, "The woman who refused to be quiet." At noon, a young reporter arrived from the local station. She introduced herself, soft-voiced, respectful. "We'd like your version," she said. "Not the gossip, the truth." I studied her face. No hunger there, just curiosity. "Fine," I said, "but I talk once, on record." We sat in the yard, her cameraman adjusting the focus while she checked her notes. "You're not angry?" she asked. "Angry's a short-term fuel," I said. "This was about accountability." She nodded, motioning for the cue. The red light blinked on. "Can you tell us what justice feels like?" "It feels quiet," I said. "It doesn't give back what's taken, but it restores balance. People think revenge heals, but it only multiplies damage. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside his lies." The interview lasted 10 minutes. By evening, clips had spread online. The comments were a mix of outrage and empathy. Some called me brave, others called me cruel. It didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time, silence had competition. A neighbor texted me later, saying she'd watched the segment with her mother. "You made her cry," the message read. "She said she wished she'd spoken up when her husband drained her savings." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me anymore. It had become a mirror for everyone who'd been told to endure, to forgive, to keep family secrets locked away. The next day, the newspaper headline showed my photo beside his mugshot. "Accountability or betrayal? The debate divides readers." I read it over coffee, steady-handed. My lawyer had warned me not to talk, but the damage was already public. Better to shape the narrative than let gossip rot it. When I stepped outside again, the cameras were fewer. One man called out, "Do you regret any of it?" I looked straight at him. "Regret is for those who stay silent." I didn't. He lowered the mic. The street quieted. A strange calm settled, the kind that feels like the world catching its breath before changing direction. By the third day, national outlets picked it up. Phrase, "elder financial abuse," trended online. Experts debated laws, panels argued ethics, and charities began contacting me for awareness campaigns. My calm voice, apparently, carried more weight than his years of performance. One afternoon, I caught sight of myself on the TV in a store window, frozen mid-sentence, eyes steady, not the woman I once was. Behind the reflection, the world moved on, but slower, more thoughtful. At 5:45 p.m., the reporter called back. "It's everywhere," she said. "You've started a conversation people avoided for years." I thanked her quietly. "Conversations can change laws," I said. "Silence only changes victims." That night, my daughter printed one of the articles and placed it on the dining table. "You finally have an audience, Mom," she said. "I never wanted one," I told her. "I just wanted the truth to breathe." The house was still, filled with the faint hum of evening traffic and the ticking clock above the mantel. I looked at the front door, half expecting another knock, another question, but none came. For the first time in months, peace felt possible. Then, as I gathered the newspapers to throw away, I saw a plain white envelope slipped under the door. No postmark, no return address. My name typed neatly in the center. I tore it open, expecting congratulations or press inquiry. Instead, inside was one line, printed in sharp black ink. "You've said enough." I read it twice, my pulse hardening. Then came the letter from his lawyer. "He's appealing," my lawyer sighed. The words dropped like a dull stone in the quiet office. I thought it was over, but men like him never accept endings. They twist consequences into new battles. She handed me an envelope, thick and formal, sealed with authority and arrogance. I traced the edge of it with my thumb, the paper rough beneath my skin. "He's claiming emotional distress," she said. "Says the trial destroyed his reputation." I let out a dry laugh. He destroyed it himself. The appeal notice lay open on her desk, paragraphs of denial, blame, and self-pity dressed in legal language. He wasn't fighting for truth. He was fighting for control. "What do we do now?" I asked. She leaned back, measured. "We wait. We respond formally. It could take months." Months. I couldn't bear the thought of reliving it all. Every hearing, every question, every reminder of the years I'd spent shrinking under his version of reality. "No," I said quietly. "We fight once more, and we end it right this time." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll file our response. But understand, appeals cost money. He's hoping you'll give up." I opened my purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside were my mother's rings, gold, worn smooth by time. I placed them on her desk. "Sell them," I said. "Use the funds for fees." "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've spent half my life paying for his mistakes," I said. "Let me spend what's left on freedom." The next morning I signed the authorization papers with her fountain pen, the ink bleeding slightly into the fibers. The act felt final, almost sacred. Each stroke said, "No more silence, no more fear." Weeks passed in a haze of waiting. I learned to measure time by phone calls and mail deliveries. The clock above the mantel ticked louder each day, as if keeping score. I cooked simple meals, avoided the news, and tried to live like someone unafraid of mailboxes. One evening around 7:30, the phone rang. My lawyer's voice carried calm satisfaction. "The appellate court reviewed the file," she said. "They dismissed his claim outright." I didn't answer right away. My fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Say that again." "It's over," she said. "His appeal's denied. He can't touch you now." I closed my eyes, letting the weight fall away. For so long, justice had felt like a moving target, something always just beyond reach. But now, it was here. Quiet, undramatic, real. She continued. "The judge noted the evidence was overwhelming. His claim of emotional harm was baseless." A small laugh escaped me. For once, his feelings couldn't buy him mercy. That night I sat in the living room, surrounded by stillness. The clock hands aligned at 8, the sound steady and even. I stared at the envelope on the coffee table, the same one that had carried his last attempt at control. I picked it up, tore it cleanly in two, and fed it into the fireplace. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. A faint trace of smoke drifted upward, disappearing into nothing. That's how his power felt now. Gone, reduced to ash. My daughter called soon after. "Mom, is it true?" she asked, breathless. "Yes," I said. "The appeal's dismissed." She exhaled a long-held breath. "Then it's done." "It's done," I repeated. For the first time in years, the word done didn't feel temporary. I sat back, staring at the faint glow in the hearth. Every cent I'd spent, every ring I'd sold, it had all led here. Justice costs, yes, but silence costs more. When I finally turned off the lights, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt earned. Peace finally felt possible. I miss how loud it used to be. The words slipped out before I realized I'd spoken them. The house was quiet now, not peaceful yet, just hollow. The kind of silence that follows years of noise, arguments, and the steady unraveling of what once passed for family. Every sound seemed amplified. The creak of the floor, the kettle whistling, the slow turn of pages. I caught myself listening for voices that would never return. My daughter had moved back to her apartment downtown, rebuilding her life one cautious step at a time. I didn't stop her. Healing needed distance. Most mornings, I left the house by 9 and walked to the community center on Maple Street. The air there smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Ordinary, grounding. I'd started volunteering 2 weeks after the appeal ended. It began as a distraction, but soon became something else. I sat with women who spoke in whispers, afraid to be overheard even in safety. Their stories echoed mine. Shared bank accounts drained, wills rewritten, dignity traded for dependency. I helped them fill out forms, reviewed receipts, explained legal terms I'd learned the hard way. One afternoon, a woman about my age looked up from her paperwork and asked, "Does it ever stop hurting?" I said, "Not completely, but it changes shape. It stops controlling you." She nodded slowly, as if trying the idea on for size. That conversation stayed with me. Back home, I began lighting a candle every evening around 8. Lavender, the same scent I used to hate because he liked it. Now it marked calm, not control. The flame's small circle of light felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. The house was still cluttered with reminders. The old clock he insisted on buying, the leather chair that outlasted his presence, the framed wedding photo I couldn't bring myself to hide. It wasn't nostalgia anymore. It was evidence of survival. Some nights, I'd sit with that photo and a notebook, writing down memories not to relive them, but to make sense of them. I wrote about the lies that built the walls, the money that built the trap, the silence that sealed it shut. I wrote until my hand cramped, until my head cleared enough to sleep. At the center, they'd started a victims' relief fund for survivors of financial abuse. When they passed around the donation forms, I signed one without hesitation. I donated part of what the court had restored, not much, just enough to feel like giving back what I'd fought for. A week later, I received a small envelope from the foundation. Inside was a printed receipt and a handwritten note from the coordinator. "Your story helped others speak today." I set it beside the candle. The house began to sound different. The silence softened. The refrigerator hum, the rustle of mail, the rain against the window. All those ordinary noises returned like a gentle chorus. One morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back looked older, yes, but not broken. Her shoulders were straighter, her eyes clearer. A neighbor stopped by that afternoon with cookies and an apology. "I should have asked if you were all right back then," she said. I smiled. "You're asking now. That's enough." That evening, as the sky dimmed, I burned another lavender candle and opened my notebook again. The page before me was blank, but it didn't scare me anymore. Blank meant possible. I wrote one line: "Freedom isn't loud, it's steady." The photo from our wedding stayed on the shelf. I didn't hide it or frame it away. I kept it there as proof, not of pain, but of distance. Proof that respect, once shattered, could still be rebuilt from ashes. I closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and let the faint trace of lavender linger. The quiet felt different now, not empty, earned. Then the phone rang once more. "Grandma, will you stand next to me this time?" That question stopped me cold. Years had passed since the courtroom, since the quiet evenings alone. My grandson was standing before me in a crisp suit, holding out his hand with the same shy smile he had as a boy. Behind him, the room buzzed with laughter, soft music, the hum of another chance at happiness. I nodded, but for a moment I couldn't move. The last wedding had ended in tears and whispers. This one felt different, lighter. When I finally took his hand, I felt the tremor in his palm. "You're nervous," I whispered. He smiled. Only about getting the family photo right this time. We both laughed, but his words landed deeper than he knew. The last photo had been the one that broke us. Me cut out, pushed to the edge, turned into a shadow in my own family. That image had followed me for years. Now the photographer called everyone closer. I stood near the center, unsure if I belonged there. My daughter nudged me gently. "You do," she said. The camera flash caught the moment just as his new wife slipped her hand through his arm. The frame held us, steady, whole, no one blurred or cropped away. For the first time in a long while, I didn't brace for someone to step forward and rearrange me. Later, during the reception, I sat at a table near the dance floor. The music drifted through the room, soft piano, the kind that fills spaces without demanding attention. I watched him dance, laughing freely, the years of strain gone from his shoulders. The ring on his finger glinted faintly under the lights, a quiet symbol of starting again. A little girl, one of the flower girls, ran past and almost tripped over my chair. She stopped, giggled, and said, "You look happy." "I am," I said, finally. When the photographer brought over the printed proofs, I took one carefully. The paper was warm from the printer, smelling faintly of ink and gloss. Everyone was smiling. No one looked afraid. I traced the edge of the image with my thumb and whispered, "Didn't I warn you about love built on pride?" But this time it wasn't anger. It was understanding. He came over a few minutes later. "You said something?" "Just talking to the photo," I said. He grinned. "That's a good one. We'll frame it in the living room." I slipped the picture into my purse, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. A reminder that healing doesn't erase the past. It rewrites its shape. As the evening wore on, the family gathered for one last group shot. Someone handed me a small bouquet. My daughter leaned in and whispered, "You look beautiful, Mom." I smiled. It's the piece. It shows. When the final photo was taken, everyone cheered. The sound filled the hall like a heartbeat, returning after too long a silence. Driving home that night, I rested the photo on the passenger seat. Streetlights streaked across the frame, catching flashes of faces. My grandson, his wife, my daughter beside me. No one was missing. No one erased. At home, I placed it in the same album that once held the picture I couldn't bear to look at for years. Now the two would live side by side, proof that even broken stories can end with balance, not bitterness. The house was quiet when I turned off the lights. The album lay open on the table, the photo glowing faintly in the dim. I didn't close it. Some memories deserve to breathe. This time, the picture stayed complete. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story with respect and gratitude.